at 1 o'clock exactly on my computer. So I think we'll get started here. I'm going to get started with a few housekeeping rules first. I am recording this session and I will make that recording available either later today or on Monday when it's available or when it's ready via Zoom. This is the 5th webinar in our installment 6-part series on project management for libraries. Happy Friday, everyone. It's just great. As you can see, I'm really excited. The sun is shining and I'm really happy that it's Friday and I'm ready to get out there. But I'm also really happy to be here and to talk about team-based projects, because I think this is, for me, the most exciting part about project management. It is the piece where we communicate with other folks and we are able to monitor tasks and work through the progression of projects. And that's what we are going to talk about today. It is kind of the meat of the project management portion, as I see it. You do have your videos and audio turned off for this session. It would be helpful if you kept it that way while I'm speaking. During the Q&A portion, feel free to share your audio and video as you need to. You can also use the chat to ask your questions. I have a colleague, Linda Mork, with me today who will be monitoring the chat to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks as I move through our session. The session is recorded again. I will send that out to you in an email with also a planning template. I've got a planning template that I'll be sharing. I'll go over that in the session. And then also in the email will be a link to our feedback form. It would be really helpful if you could complete the feedback form. If not today, maybe on Monday. Certainly do not do it on the weekend. I don't want anybody to work on the weekend. All right, so let's move on to our first slide. Our first slide is going to talk about our agenda, what we're going to be covering today. And we're going to be going over what is a project team, what makes up a project team. We're going to look at the work breakdown structure, team communication, project management models and methods. And finally, I'm going to share with you 3 projects that I've been working on, or I had worked on, and the different ways models, methods, and communication came into play with all of them. I'm excited to share those projects with you as well. It shows a wide variety of different types of projects that libraries work on a regular basis. Okay. So let's get to it. First, let's start with an understanding of what a project team is. It is a team whose members usually, but not always, belong to different groups, functions, and are assigned to activities for the same project. A team can be divided into sub-teams according to the need of the project. Usually, project teams are only used for a defined period of time. The project team often works under the direction of the project manager and consists of a variety of members. These usually provide a variety of specialist services to the project manager. They often need to have a wide variety of understanding of many issues and the ability to adapt to the changing project requirements. Therefore, the formulation of a strong team is important, and they must be able to tackle a variety of issues collaboratively and learn to negotiate any soft or shadow issues that may arise to resolve problems effectively. So communication skills abound with team-based projects. The work breakdown structure. Ashley talked about this the work breakdown structure in her project planning webinar and shared a work breakdown structure Excel template. I will also share a template that I used recently for a conference planning committee. Having a good work breakdown structure to work with will be an invaluable tool as you move through your project. I have always found it easiest to get started with a work breakdown structure by identifying the milestones or phases of a project first. The milestones kind of help build that frame for your project. The Gantt chart. A Gantt chart lets you visualize the task list from your work breakdown structure. That comes from your work breakdown structure on a calendar, so you can view it in a timeline. A Gantt chart isn't necessary for all projects, but can be helpful when working on larger projects, projects with multiple groups of people, projects with many tasks that overlap or can be worked on simultaneously, and may also have different end dates to them. This will be talked about in more detail in our last webinar in the series on software tools. I also have an example of a Gantt chart, a couple of examples of a Gantt chart when we look at project examples. Okay. Communication is so interwoven in projects, especially when you're working with teams, multiple teams, different people from the same organization or from outside your organization. As we stated, communication is an important component. With a team, you want to make sure that members have the necessary information they need to work with. When in doubt, err on the side of over communicating. It may feel annoying, but under communicating can lead to difficulty at points along the way. I'll also share different ways I used communication in my project examples. Models and methods. I showed this slide in the introduction session in January, and I want to revisit this. Why follow a method? By following a good project management structure, a team will have a good understanding about their roles and responsibilities. They will also be aware of the schedule of the deliverables, an understanding of what the deliverables are, and will have the opportunity to plan their schedule accordingly. A good project management structure ensures that the project is completed within a specified time period and within budget. This also, for the team members, allowing them to plan out their schedule accordingly, you're really just kind of paying respect to the other work that your team members have. So these are the models that we'll be looking at today. They certainly are not all of the project management models that are out there, but these are ones that typically fall into play with library work. A project can use different models and methods through its life cycle, and depending on what is needed at different stages, these are the main models that have been used in project management. Agile is very popular with its own standalone model, with its own certification process, but in recent years, it's been folded into the project management architecture. When I was going to taking my certificate program through the U of M, Agile had its own standalone certification course plan. And I did take an introduction to Agile at that time. And even at that time, I believe this was 2018, maybe 2019, 2018. The instructor was saying, stick with the project management certificate. I don't see this being its own standalone process for very longer. And she was right. It has been kind of incorporated into the overall architecture. While it's important to state which model or models, while it isn't important to state which model or models you'll be using throughout the span of the project, it's important to have an understanding of these different types of models because they can help with communication processes and keep the project flowing without wasting time. So the first model that we'll look at is the waterfall model, also known as cascade or staircase. The waterfall model identifies specific steps. They are clearly defined and they must work in order to accomplish a fixed goal or accomplish a goal. The step task is dependent on the previous step's completion before starting. This model is useful when all the requirements of a project are known. And an example of this could be a summer reading program, something that's been done before and will be done again in the same or similar fashion. This morning when I was thinking of the waterfall model, I was also thinking a recipe, if you're into cooking, a recipe could be considered a waterfall model where you have your list of ingredients and you must complete steps in a specific order to actually produce the meal or dish that you're hoping to create. The next model is the spiral model. Some tasks may not yet be known. That can happen. That happens in so many projects where you don't know all of the tasks yet at the beginning of the project. You may need to gather more information to help inform the next step or set of tasks. This model can be helpful if your project requires a research phase. And who in the library does not like the research phase? Incremental model. In a spiral model, the tasks may be independent of each other, but still contribute to the whole of the project. I'm sorry, in the incremental model, the tasks may be independent of each other, but still contribute to the whole of the project. This can be helpful if there are parts of the project still unknown. A good example of this model is with creating a website. One part of a website may be dependent on a new software or database component that has yet to be created, but other parts are not and can be completed at a separate time. Another example is if a project is dependent on grant funding, but the funding may come in at different times. The project can be spaced out to align with the funding points. Sometimes larger projects that may have a longer life cycle can be portioned out in an incremental way. Knowing these key elements of a project helps your team members plan out the project appropriately. Identifying these elements in the scope of a project is also really helpful. And the project examples that I will be presenting later on are going to have are going to show different ways that I've used most of these models. All right, the next one that we'll talk about is Agile. Agile is different than the previous models that we talked about and different than all of the models that are a part of project management. The previous methods focus on the project and following a plan. Agile focuses on the product, taking into account feedback along the way. This is created by software developers. The Agile principles really are communication practices. I encourage you to go to the agilemanifesto.org website and read through the Agile Manifesto. Again, it lays a good groundwork for communication practices. The website itself looks old, looks probably about 2002 era, but the information in there is still relevant and very worthwhile reading. When your project is in the meat of its work, the production phase, this is when Agile models shine. Agile is increasing in popularity because it is dynamic in practice, allowing for changes in the process, timeline, and scope throughout the life cycle. Agile enhances the ability to manage changing priorities. And we are going to look at two main, more popular methodologies of Agile, which are Scrum and Kanban. The names are a bit weird, but they work. Scrum. Scrum is a rugby term for all of you non-sports people. It means a formation of players. I am not a rugby fan, but I've learned some of these concepts as related to project management, and the analogy works, put it that way. It is a learn as we go process that embraces change, and who doesn't experience change in a project? Events are designed to enable transparency to inspect and adapt the process. Events are used to create regularity and to minimize the need for meetings. Sprints are the heartbeat of Scrum. If you ever hear of the term sprints, when you're talking about managing projects, this is what they're talking about. They are fixed length events determined by the team to create consistency and regular communication about the process. A new sprint starts immediately after the conclusion of the previous sprint. Sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for that sprint or work cycle. This plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire team. So this is really breaks that hierarchical structure and lays the responsibility at the team level. The purpose of the daily Scrum is to inspect progress and adjust the upcoming planned work. Daily Scrums improve communications, identify impediments, promote quick decision-making, and consequently eliminate the need for other meetings. Typically, a daily Scrum meeting is short. If you do have a daily Scrum meeting, they're very short, and they're usually between the Scrum leader, which is called Scrum Master, again, a rugby term, and your supervising stakeholder. So these meetings, again, are short in nature, probably maybe 15 minutes tops. The purpose, again, to clarify the work in progress and to make any adjustments if needed quickly. The purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. The purpose of the sprint retrospective is to plan ways to increase quality and effectiveness. Sprints help with breaking up tasks into smaller steps, which improves accountability. Sprints reduce the risk of misunderstandings through improved teamwork while facilitating changes. My instructor in my Intro to Agile class course stated, I remember her saying that Scrum is simple, but the work may not necessarily be simple. Following the concepts of these Scrums is really easy to adapt. And I'm going to show you that. Excuse me, I'm going to show you that in one of my project examples. Okay, Kanban. I'm not sure if you've heard of this term Kanban before. It's a highly visual framework that presents project details in a concise manner. Kanban sorts workflow management through online boards that are easily customized. You can also use physical boards, like using a chalkboard or a marker board, and laying out the boards in a physical manner, and then using sticky notes. That is the original concept of Kanban boards, but they have moved in online, and those are really easy to work with. Kanban boards apply multiple columns or lanes. They call them lanes, categorized by key details such as project status and roles. I have an example of a Kanban board in one of my project examples that we'll take a look at in just a little bit. Also, Sarah will talk in more detail about Kanban boards in her software tools webinar in 2 weeks. Okay, we're going to shift gears here now, and we're going to move into my project examples. I've got 3 projects that I want to talk about and how vastly different they are, yet the models that were applied are very similar. So the first model that I want to talk about is conference planning. I was recently part of a conference planning committee, and the conference ran for 3 half days in February. We brought together the planning committee in August and started the planning process in August. So our timeline was August through February. February 23rd was the start of the conference. We started by identifying the tasks by first breaking the project out into phases based on recognized milestones. In our wrap-up meeting last week, 2 of the things that we identified as what went well throughout the process was clear tasks from for the planning team. If questions arose when communicating them through our regular check-ins and updated, we addressed them quickly and updated documents as needed. Also, having a group listserv was extremely helpful so that everyone was part of all communications. Again, err on the side of over communicating. No one was left out of the loop, which can happen when you are using the CCing folks on emails. People always get left out of those CCs. It's an easy thing to do. Here, I want to bring up a copy of our timeline and tasks document that we used. This was the guide that we used to move through the planning process. So I'm going to try sliding this over. I'm hoping that's going to overlay over my session. Please let me know if you can see this. So I'm bringing in my planning timeline and tasks. Can you see this over the slide presentations? Yes, great, awesome, thank you. Okay, so this was our guide that we used for the conference planning committee, and some of you probably have been on conference planning committees before and know how they work. I, along with another member of the planning committee, both have project management backgrounds, so we were very structured in nature and organized, and we wanted to make sure that we laid everything out. We also wanted to make sure that everybody was in the communication loop. We had shared folders that everyone had access to. We also had a website that everyone had access to as far as making any needed adjustments. We also used the tool Sched as a scheduling tool. Everyone had access to that as well and knew how to make adjustments if needed on the fly. So here we have our timeline and task broken out by date, task, persons responsible, status, and notes. In the template that I'll share with you either later today or on Monday, I'm using this as a template, and I just kind of taken out all of my notes. So we have our starting committee in August. We had the kickoff meeting, gathering, planning team, and then we had our notes here of what we needed to decide on. Again, we were looking at some milestones of when we needed to accomplish certain tasks. So we identified in October that we needed to send out a save the date. In order to have that save the date, we had to have the website created and finalized. And then shortly following that save the date, we wanted to issue the call for proposals. We identified who are the planning members that are going to be responsible for which pieces. We've also have notes from our planning meetings. Moving through these our monthly breakouts. And again, you don't have to do it by month. Whatever might be more appropriate for your project can be used here as far as a date line. But this is a timeline template. And we were checking in. We had monthly meetings. So again, these corresponded with our timeline. In December, we recognized that we had to finalize our program schedule and the steps that were involved with that, who was going to be responsible for that, and also shoring up our keynote. In January, we wanted to confirm and finalize those presenters and presentations. We wanted to make sure that we got all the information from the presenters as well. Confirming the title, description, we wanted their bios and pictures if needed, pronouns if appropriate, and also if they were okay with recording the session. Then we were able to create our registration form, and we made that available at the end of January, beginning of February. We added all of our information to the website. We opened up our registration. That was another milestone that we identified as when we were going to have that registration open. And the timeline from when the registration was going to be open to when the conference was going to start, we identified the tasks needed in that time frame, which was communicating with registrants, attendees, and setting up the tech checks with the presenters. And those tech checks were one-on-one sessions for individual presenters or groups of folks that were going to present together as one presentation. We also grouped lightning sessions together. We had lightning session rounds where there were 2 separate presentations within one track timeline. And we wanted them to be together in the tech check so that they were familiar, comfortable with each other and how they were going to kind of pass the torch in working together. And then another milestone was the closing of the registration, beginning of the conference. You can see here all in the our status along the way. It's all done. As we were progressing throughout this process, though, it was either to do, in process, or done. Those were the main terms that we used for this section. So here, it's all in the done process, which means our planning committee convened. We're done. And it was a great successful conference. So I'll share this timeline template with you all later as well. I found it really useful. I found it a great guide to see who was doing what the tasks were at hand.
Carla, we have a question in the chat.
Sure. On the conference planning timeline and tasks document, that you shared, did you list the website accessible to all team members and any other high-level details so it's all in one place for the team to see? No, actually. We had a shared Google folder, a working folder with multiple subfolders in it that were categorized for necessary components such as website, presentations, post-conference, things like that. And all of those working folders were accessible by everyone. Everyone shared in the documentation and updated it as needed. There were Excel files in there showing, like in the presentation section, there were Excel files that showed the schedules with the list of presenters and their contact information, along with information about their tech check dates. Did they attend their tech check date? Their presentation slide link, and a few who was the monitors for each session. We attached 2 monitors from the planning committee for each session, as well as a host for each session. The host was responsible for the tech component, the Zoom, and the moderators were responsible for introducing the presenters, reviewing the chats for Q&A, and keeping presenters on task and on time. Does that answer your question? On the actual doc, not the template. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So as I mentioned, for this project, for this conference planning, we identified back in August phases of the project, milestones, what needed to be done at certain points. Like we knew that we wanted to get the call for proposals out early enough so that the folks had time to put together some thoughtful concepts and submit them. And then we also needed time to review all of those proposals. And then another milestone was that registration, getting that registration out so that we could have people start registering for the conference. So here I've got an example here of those milestones that we used. And it's working backwards. So October 16th was our milestone for website completion. Oops, not yet. Website completion, so that the announcements could go out. December 31st was our milestone for finalizing the schedule and the program. January 29th was our milestone for opening registration. And then February 23rd was milestone for conference, beginning of the conference. All right, let's see here. And this is an example of how a Kanban board can be used. This is just one way that a Kanban board can be used. In this example, I use roles and function, roles of the planning committee and their functions. And I broke it out into 3 columns of before the conference, day of the conference, and after the event. Kanban boards are really easy to use. They're a quick way to see what is going on and what is coming down the pike, what needs to happen next. Kanban boards, I have another example of a Kanban board that I'll use in another project. And I use that Kanban board in a slightly different way. These again are very, they're versatile and easy to use. All right, so the next project that I want to talk about is the Statewide E-Resources RFP. This was a big project. It was large. It involved many teams. There were so many different working components with this. The project spanned over 2 years. We started by reviewing archived documents and talked to people that were involved in the previous RFP. We used those notes as guides in looking forward, planning this RFP. The project had many different stages, which led to a mix of models that we used. We started with a spiral model at the beginning when we were doing research. First, research about the last RFP to see what we may need to move forward. Then we needed to assess the then current collection, both internally by organization members and externally, calling for input from the broader community. When we began working on the creation of the RFP itself, we moved into the Agile Scrum method. We made sure to check in every 2 weeks. That was a key component. Everybody knew, okay, we're gonna have 2-week incremental check-in points. Everybody knew of these. They were on our calendars. Sometimes we met face-to-face. This was pre-pandemic. Sometimes we only needed to meet via email. And as we identified a set of resources for the, we met every 2 weeks, we reviewed the work that had been done. And then we also looked at what were the next steps that were coming up for the next 2 weeks. As we identified a set of resources for the greater community to review and assess possible e-resources, we moved back into a spiral process. We identified milestones that helped in building out the work breakdown structure and tasks that needed to be done. Internally, the Gantt chart and work check-ins were integral to moving this project forward. Milestones and constraints. So again, as I mentioned, we identified milestones, kind of building the framework for the work breakdown structure and the tasks. We had some major constraints with this project around timing and firm deadlines. Most obvious was the previous contract's end date of June 30th. We needed a new package in place, ready to go, starting July 1st. That was a very obvious deadline. Other timing constraints were with finalizing the RFP and finalizing the selection of the new ELM collection, as there were many factors outside of our control that needed to be addressed. One example was with finalizing the new ELM collection, where there were negotiations with vendors, as well as contract review with University and Office of Higher Ed offices. These constraints were written into the milestones. So everybody knew about them. We all saw what they were. Here is I'm showing you a version of our milestones that we identified at the beginning. Some of these dates that are attached to these milestones wiggled a little bit, but again, we had some firm constraints with deadlines, and so we didn't have much wiggle room with them. And now this is an example of the Gantt chart that we used, and this is just a small portion of the Gantt chart that we were working with. And this shows how many tasks were happening at the same time by different teams. Having this awareness allowed us to maintain a line of communication helpful for the team members to stay on task. We knew what everybody was doing and what everybody was working on. We also knew what their needs were, and we wanted to make sure that we met their needs in a timely manner so that they could do their work. With this Gantt chart, you could zoom in to view a month or even a week at a time to see details of each task. I've kind of oversimplified this, just highlighting the main task categories, mostly for privacy's sake, but this is just it shows you that there's a lot of complexity behind these tasks, these categories. And having this Gantt chart really helped all of us see how this was moving forward and what we were working on. All right. So with the Elm RFP, we had, again, many different communication components built into it. There was a variety of communication methods for the different teams and the stakeholders throughout the process. We used, for stakeholders, mainly, we used website and listservs to communicate. With task force members, we used listservs, Zoom meetings, shared Google Documents. With internal team members, we used the project management software and the Gantt chart. We actually built the task list first and then added it to the Gantt chart. We had the flexibility to edit tasks via the task list or the Gantt chart, and they were updated in both places at once. So for us, this was a tool that was kind of the foundation of our project. And I really want to just kind of emphasize that Sarah is going to talk about those software tools in the next session, and understanding that, you know, libraries have financial constraints in that we can't really go out and purchase software for some of these needs. There are a lot of tools out there, a lot of free tools. I even use some other free tools as components for project planning, not necessarily working on with a specific one. This Gantt chart was part of a software tool that was purchased by Minitex. And while there are a lot of project management tools out there, it was relatively cheap, but fit our needs very well. Okay. So the last project that I want to talk about was a software migration project that I worked on. This project, I was tasked with migrating our statewide virtual reference service from Question Point to the SpringShare Lib Answers platform. The product was bought out. As some of you may know, this product was bought out by SpringShare, so there was no need for an RFP or an RFI. This was the product we were going with, which really simplified that portion of the project. It's really nice not to have to do an RFP, and you're just presented with, this is what you're going with. Sometimes it's easier in that aspect. However, there were still many different working pieces to this migration that needed to be identified and worked on. This product was SpringShare's Lib Answers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lib Answers. Maybe you're familiar with LibGuides, but SpringShare overall was an awesome company, is an awesome company to work with. They're very responsive and attentive to library needs. SpringShare was building the cooperative model. They did not have a cooperative to begin with, so they were building this model from the ground up. I was able to work on chunks at a time when it became available to me. I checked in with library coordinators every 2 weeks with updates. Even if there was no updates, I would check in just to say, no updates. Having this communication with the coordinators put them at ease about the process and lent to buy-in and support. You can see that we used spiral and incremental models for this process. The information that came from SpringShare, it was not all at one time because they were building this model themselves. They really didn't have much to share at the very beginning. They could only share certain portions along the way. And so that component itself led to it being more of an incremental model. However, there was a spiral component to it because I needed to do an evaluation of our existing AskMin cooperative. AskMin is the name of our statewide virtual reference service. And I needed to do an evaluation of that cooperative structure and the roles of Minitex and the roles of our library coordinators across Minnesota. Also in the spiral component was the training of the coordinators and library staff, as well as one-on-ones with library coordinators. I wanted to make sure that library coordinators were getting all of the information they needed to create their specific institution's subscription within LibAnswers. So I did not create a milestone or work breakdown structure for this project because it was piecemealed based on the information and the work provided from SpringShare. Again, I didn't have all the information up front. Oh.
Hi, Carla. Sorry. Sarah Rasmussen does have a question about the last product.
Oh, sure.
Before we move on.
Okay. On the last project, it sounds like external factors with the vendor constrained the project management process. You could use incremental beyond that for each of these projects. Where on the decision-making spectrum did the selection of the project management process fall? Unilateral decision by main project management or executive sponsor consultative decision or team consensus decision. Thank you for these case studies. They're very illuminating. Sarah, do you mean the software, the project management software tool? Or do you mean the relationship component? Oh, like Agile and Waterfall. Oh, they kind of just fell into place naturally. Again, we didn't identify going into this project, we didn't identify, okay, we're going to move into a spiral model to evaluate and assess our collection. And then we're going to move into an Agile Scrum method for communication processes through the working component of the RFP. It just kind of fell into place naturally as we worked with the project. The key component here was having the milestones as the framework to build our tasks from. Identifying those tasks, visualized, made us aware of what were the different pieces that were going to need to happen. We started with this planning process over 2 years before the contracts with our vendors were going to end. So we needed that time to really kind of shape those milestones and that initial work, because the other thing that I really didn't mention in here was that all of us working on this RFP process, we had been involved with the previous RFP that took place between 2013 and 2015, but we were very minor players in that RFP. Some of us were not even involved with that RFP or any RFP process at all before this. Most of the major players with that previous RFP had retired. They were gone out of the institution and took away that institutional knowledge with them. And so we really had zero basis to work with. And that's one of the key pieces of why we wanted to review archived documents. And the people that we did interview and talk to that were involved with the previous RFP also really helped us shape what and identify what milestones needed to be in place. I hope that answered your question. Did that? Okay, good. All right. And if there are any other components of that that you'd like to ask about, please feel free. I'm just going to finish up with this last project example, and then we're going to move into our Q&A. Okay, so this is one of my last slides. And this is just looking at the Kanban board that I did use, because I didn't have the opportunity with this migration software project to build milestones or work breakdown structure, because again, information was piecemealed to me along the way from SpringShare mostly. Also, I had never done a major software migration before. So I use Kanban boards to really help me visualize all of the different pieces that were going to be in play with the migration software, and seeing what issues were coming up from library coordinators across Minnesota, capturing that information and sharing that with SpringShare in regards to building that cooperative model. And it also helped me push out information work out to my library coordinators as well. So, and then I used, with this Kanban board, I used Trello, which is I used the free version of Trello. I have a free account with Trello, and I use it for a lot of different personal goals. I even use Trello boards for when my family goes on vacation. I use them for planning out my vacation. So that free tool is a really nice, helpful one. All right, so the last slide that I want to share with you, and this is not something that we necessarily need to get into, but I want to share this. I want it to be part of the slides that you can take, so that you can be aware of some of the common causes of project failure, what to look out for. And I just want you to know also two things. One, I totally snagged this from my coursework at the U of M. And the other is that if there are any pieces where you find challenges with the projects that you're working on, you are not alone. Just to show you that there are these common areas of project failure, shows that these are not new. People have experienced these before, but just seeing something like this, maybe it can be helpful, at least in asking the question of, what can I do to move the team and the project successfully beyond this obstacle? Okay, so with that, let's open it up to questions. And as you're thinking about some questions, I'll bring up this slide again. Maybe this will give you some ideas of what you might be working on now or in the future, and how you might want to plan for them.
Hi, I have a question if I could.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Lori.
Lori.
My question was about the different models that you were talking about, because one was an incremental model. And what is the difference between that and kind of the waterfall or the step-by-step one? They seem really similar to me. Am I missing something?
There are similarities between them. Waterfall is more of a rigid, structured process where you know all of the requirements that are part of that plan, and things have to happen in a specific way. So step 1 has to happen before step 2 can happen.
Okay.
And step 3 cannot happen until step 2 is completed.
Okay.
So it's a very structured format. Incremental is like my example with the software migration is chunks can be done at different times.
Oh, okay, but they're incremental. Got it. Okay, thank you. That was super helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, maybe I just answered all of your questions throughout the presentation. Thanks, Susan. Still contemplating the last slide. Yeah. Yeah, that is a lot to take into. I was a little hesitant, but I thought it could be helpful going forward. When you're not sure which model to use, which is your go-to model? Agile is always the go-to model, always, because it's so dynamic and versatile, and it adapts to any changes that happen along the way. Agile is the best. Scrum, as a methodology, can really come into play as far as that team work. And again, building in that communication process through the work cycles can be really helpful. With the agilemanifesto.org, again, read through the 12 principles and great communication practices. And thank you, Linda, for noting the next webinar again is on software tools, and that will be in 2 weeks. And that will be by our Minitex IT staff member, Sarah Anderson, who has worked with several project management software tools. 2 weeks, yes, March 26th. And this last slide, uncomfortable, yeah, is helpful in reminding me how all the pieces need to fit together. Yes, that is for sure, Lori, I agree. All right, well, perhaps we should wrap things up here. It's a gorgeous Friday afternoon. Thank you all again for attending. If you do have any questions along the way, I'm happy to help with those. You have my email address, and I will be sending out this recording, that template, and the link to the feedback form later this afternoon. Oh, I do want to show just here is the more information. If you're in Minnesota or even outside of Minnesota, you're interested in more learning opportunities with Minitex, my organization, you can visit our events page. You can sign up. There's also the Level Up Minnesota Library Professional Development Network. And some of the resources that I used in putting together my information. All right, well, thank you very much. Have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you all.